Here we have the program we created on the last episode with this circle, which we can click and drag to a new position. We can see the cursor changes when we roll over the circle, and also the circle gets a thin line, and when we press, then the line is getting thicker. Let's make some changes to this program. The first thing I'm going to do is use two different cursors. One will be shown when the mouse is pressed, and the other when the mouse is not pressed, but we are inside the circle. So I'm gonna move this out of here, this cursor hand, and I'm going to put two of them. One will be used when the mouse is pressed, and I'm going to switch this cursor here to move. That's one of the available cursors. And otherwise, if the mouse is inside the circle but not clicked, then we will show the hand. So this will show even better the behavior. Look, now when I click, you can see the hand is turning into a grabbing hand, which tells us that we can move this. I want to do some other improvements to the program. Now, when we enter the circle, the border appears suddenly. The same thing happens when we move the mouse out of the circle, it just disappears. And when we click, the border becomes suddenly thicker and suddenly thinner when we release. It would be nice that these effects were animated. So the line would appear or disappear slowly, like fading in or fading out. And the same would happen with the thickness of the line. So those are two things we can improve. A third thing we can improve is that when we click the circle far from the center, then it's suddenly jumping to the center. This looks a bit strange. There are several ways to improve this. The best way would be to be able to drag the circle from anywhere and avoid this jump, but this is a little bit more complicated. What I'm going to do is that this jump here is not sudden, but it will animate to reposition itself, but smoothly, and that's very easy to do. The problem is in these two lines here. We are saying that suddenly the center of the circle is the position of the mouse. But instead of making this big change, we could use the function called lerp to move a little bit in the right direction. So I can type here lerp, then I have to say which is the current value, which is x, and this is actually the value we would like to have, mouse x. And now I have to say here how much should I move in this direction. If I type 0, then nothing changes, we stay at x. If I type 1, we suddenly jump to wherever mouse x is. But if I type a number like maybe 0.2, we move slightly towards the mouse. I'm gonna do the same thing here, lerp y, mouse y, and the same amount, 0.2. So now if I run the program, and now it's complaining that lerp returns float value, but x is an integer. So I'm gonna switch these variables here to float. Float x, float y, also float sz. Now it should work. So now when I click here, you can see that the circle is repositioning itself to be centered where the mouse is, but it's not so sudden, so I think it looks a little bit better. Now let's fix this white border. Let's start with the stroke weight. We have here two options. The weight can be 2 or 5. So if we want to animate this, we have to keep in a variable the current value. Is it 2 or is it 5? Currently, it's not stored anywhere, so we cannot change it slightly. So I'm gonna declare here a float current weight. This is gonna be equal to 2, for example. Another variable we would need is the target weight or the destination. This variable indicates what's the current weight, and then we need to store somewhere what's the weight we want. So I'm gonna say here float target weight. For now, I'm just gonna leave it also at 2. So I think the variable names are quite descriptive. That's the current weight and the target weight. Now, instead of suddenly changing the stroke weight, what we have to do is change the target weight. So I'm gonna say here target weight is 5. And we will slowly move to achieve that weight. Not at once, like we did until now. I'm gonna delete this. And here, same thing. I'm gonna say here target weight is 2. Now here, before drawing the ellipse, I'm gonna say that the stroke weight is the current weight. And finally, we need here one more line that changes the current weight in the direction of the target weight. So I will say here current weight is, and I'm gonna use the same method we used here with a lerp current weight. So that's what we currently have. Target weight is what we want to achieve. And depending on this number here, we will achieve the target weight faster or slower. If it's near 1, then it will be very fast. If we type here a smaller number, then the animation will be slower. So let's run the program and see now if that's working. So now I click, and you can see how it gets thicker or thinner, but not at once. It's an animation. I think it looks better. Now we have to achieve the same effect for the appearing or disappearing of the line, which currently is like a switch. It's just on off. So we just have to imitate the same behavior here. At the beginning of the program, again, I'm gonna declare two variables, float, and we are going to do this by changing the alpha. Right now, what we do is here to have a stroke, white stroke, or not to have a stroke at all. But instead of that, what we're going to do is to have always a white stroke, but with different alpha. That's the opacity. So we can define how transparent it is. So in the case we don't want any stroke, we will say it's fully transparent, so it's invisible. And in the case we want to have a border, then we will say it's not transparent at all. So let's enter here those two variables. Float current alpha is 0. Float target alpha is 0. So now we have declared those two variables. And the same way here we change the target weight. Now in these two cases here with the stroke 255 and the no stroke, we're going to replace these by target alpha is, what should we enter here? This is the case where we want to have a visible border. So I'm going to say the alpha is 255. And if we don't want a stroke, then we will use target alpha is 0, which means invisible. Let's enter two more lines like this up here. We will say current alpha is lerp current alpha target alpha 0,2. So what we do is to say that the current alpha is a new current alpha, which is between whatever value it has now and whatever value we want to achieve. And this means how far should we jump between the current alpha to the target alpha. Now let's type here stroke. We use a white color and then the current alpha. So now we should be able to see an animation of this border appearing and disappearing. We could change the values. Instead of having 2 and 5, let's make them more visible. For example, 10 and 5. I think now it's easier to see how the line appears and disappears slowly. And when we click, you can see it becomes quite big. In the same way, we are changing here some properties like the stroke weight or the stroke color. You could be changing also the fill color to define what happens to the fill color when you enter the circle or when you get out of the circle or when you click. Or you could change also the size, for example. So you can experiment with the size. Maybe when you click the circle, it becomes slightly bigger. And when you release the mouse, then it goes back to normal. If you do those changes using this lerp function, then you can have a nice twinned effect. Let's see in the next episode how we can convert this circle into a rectangle.